much, Marta, and warm welcome from my side as well. We are in April, meaning that the TaSHI project turned 1 year old, so we are celebrating this month our anniversary. In the last days of this anniversary month, we are glad to welcome you at the second webinar of our pilot project. If you joined us last November, we already started a webinar series on the TaSHI pilot, where we aim to describe and present you the different stages and the advancement of our pilot project. Right now, at the second webinar, we are describing and presenting you two very exciting case studies from Lithuania and Lombardy. And I hope you will enjoy the details and we can discuss many exciting details together. Let me give the floor to Paolo Michelutti, the work package leader of the pilot implementations, and I wish you a nice webinar. Thank you, Paolo.
Thanks a lot, Esther. Hello, everyone. Good morning and welcome also from me. I'm Paolo Michelutti and I work as project manager at Agenas, that is the National Agency of Regional Health Services in Italy. And I'm in charge of leading the work package of the pilot studies in the TaSHI project. Just a few words of introduction for this second webinar of the TaSHI project. Today we are going to talk about task shifting. Of course, task shifting and task sharing, that means more or less the redistribution of tasks within workforce and also communities. There are different types of task shifting. Task delegation, task shifting, including or excluding responsibilities, task shifting between different type of health workers, or from health workers to caregivers, to patient, to digital solution. And we think, by the way, that innovation and technology, and especially digital technologies, are showing new opportunities in this regard. So and on the other side, we are aware that we are facing many challenges, some old challenges, as for example the aging of the population, and some new challenges, COVID-19 pandemic, first of all. And so the key question for today is how task shifting could be considered by health managers, policymakers, health professionals as an opportunity, as an help to face those challenges. With this question, we'll try to answer at least partially this morning in this 1 hour webinar, and we will try to have an open and frank debate on this issue without any prejudice or bias, being aware that too many times in the past, when discussing about task shifting, the conclusion were something like where we say no to task shifting, or on the other side, on the opposite, task shifting as a one-size-fits-for-all solution. Okay, so that's not the scope for this debate. And with this purpose, we invited basically 3 persons today in the webinar. A keynote speaker, Professor Gilles Dussault from the Institute of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in Lisbon, Portugal, and is also a WHO collaborator and a TaSHI advisory board member. And after the keynote speech by Gilles, we will have 2 presentations from 2 case studies that actually are analyzing and discussing within the TaSHI project the feasibility and the opportunity of task shifting, one in Lithuania and the second one in Lombardy. After those 3 presentations, we'll have an open discussion with a Q&A session, and we strongly and warmly invite all of you to use the the Q&A box or the chat box to post your question, and so we'll have time after the three presentation to answer to your question, and I will moderate the debate, and finally I will give some conclusion and closing remarks. So, okay, I'm going to mute myself, and I'm very happy and honored to welcome Professor Gilles Dussol. So, Gilles, please, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paolo. Good morning, everyone. Also, many thanks to Marta, to Esther, and to TaSHI colleagues for this kind invitation. I was asked the following question: is task shifting important? Well, the presentation of the experience of Lithuania and Lombardy will certainly give us elements of response. My own view on that is that task shifting, and I understand Paolo's definition, which is very broad, and I agree with that approach. My own view is that it is not only important, but it is much necessary. The COVID pandemic showed the need for flexibility in the definition of roles, and that it is possible to break rigid frontiers between occupations, the so-called professional silos, to use the full capacities of all workers. In the European Union, there are numerous examples of countries that authorize professionals like pharmacists, dentists, emergency paramedics, medical assistants, even medical students to vaccinate during the last 2 years, something they were not authorized to do before. In France, another example, pharmacists were authorized to renew prescriptions, something opposed by the medical profession until then. More flexibility in the definition of roles is imperative to adapt to change and to innovation. It brings multiple benefits. Teams that use all the competencies of their members deliver services of higher quality and produce higher satisfaction of users. More flexible scopes of practice can make the choice of a health profession more attractive if it offers the prospect of a career that permits the acquisition of more responsibilities and more autonomy. A rewarding role brings more professional satisfaction and can therefore become a factor of retention. Retention in the profession, retention in zones with unmet needs, the so-called medical deserts, or retention in the country, thereby preventing the loss of professionals to immigration. More flexibility means better accessibility to services. For instance, when you get prescription drugs from a nurse without having to see a physician first. Finally, countries have a superior interest in ensuring that all competencies are fully used and that the skills mix produces efficiency gains and better quality services. In a word, task sharing and task shifting potentially benefit users, workers, and society as a whole by making the health and care workforce more efficient, more motivated, and more effective. This said, the big question mark is how to produce those benefits. To say that task shifting is rational, that it is necessary, is not sufficient. The important variations in the definition of health professional roles in the European Union, for example, the roles of nurses, indicate that technical feasibility is not enough. Political feasibility is key. This is because many stakeholders with different and often conflicting interests are involved. Professional councils, trade unions, providers of services, education institutions, political actors are involved, just to name the main ones. Then the need to make changes in the legal and regulatory environment, in the education and training of health workers, in their working conditions, including their remuneration, may provoke resistance from both those who lose, entre commas, and from those who are expected to gain. I just give the example of nursing in Portugal, where the nursing council has been in favor of advanced practice for quite a number of years now, but trade unions are still against it, arguing that it means more responsibilities, and they don't believe that in the context of work overload, they can take any more, let alone that salaries are still very low and they don't expect big changes at that level. The story of advanced nursing practice in the European Union, and I would say almost everywhere, shows that change takes time without a strong commitment from political decision makers. So task shifting is important. It is above all necessary, but it is difficult. Yet it should not take place only in situations of crisis, as has been the case in the last 2 years. This is why the TaSHI project responds to a pressing need. It will help identify facilitators of and barriers to more flexibility in the division of labor in health and care. This in turn will help policymakers in the design of informed policies and strategies to build a workforce fit for the purpose of progressing towards universal health coverage. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Gilles, for this keynote speech. Thanks a lot to highlight, first of all, the many advantages of the shifting, especially during these times, and on the other hand, also thanks to highlight what are the barriers and the challenges. No, in the meanwhile, in the chat box, a nurse from Portugal confirmed what you said about the Portuguese situation, and so you said the technical feasibility is not enough, and political feasibility and political commitment is the key issue. So let's see how in Lithuania first and then in the Lombardy region they are trying to face these technical and political feasibility of the shift in their sites. So now I give the floor to Ms. Solveiga Smagariene from the Ministry of Health of the Republic of Lithuania to present the case study of Lithuania. So please, Solveiga, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paola, and good morning to everyone. I will share my screen now. Okay. So today I would like to give an overview of a Lithuanian pilot study and shortly update you on its progress. I will start my presentation from the description of our pilot goal. Okay, excuse me, I have some technical difficulties. Oh, now it's working. Okay, so the main goal of our pilot study is to strengthen the quality of healthcare services, which are provided by family medicine doctors and psychiatrists through task shifting to other healthcare specialists. In this way, family doctors and psychiatrists will have more time which they could spend to improve the quality of primary healthcare services. The goal will be reached by determining impact of task shifting between family doctors, psychiatrists, nurses, and nursing assistants. The output of pilot include guideline, report of the best practices, protocols, the list of the competencies of nurses and nursing assistants, which could be strengthened, as well as legislation improvement if needed. In our pilot, we specified 5 objectives. First one is to identify the tasks that could be delegated to other primary healthcare specialists. Secondly, we try to identify the most effective ways of delegating tasks from family doctors, psychiatrists to nurses and nursing assistants. Thirdly, we try to identify the competencies which should be additionally provided to nurses and nursing assistants. And last but not least is to provide the recommendations for improvement to institutions which are implementing the policy. As can be seen, the pilot implementation plan involves 5 steps or major milestones. First one is to review the existing legislation, selection of healthcare specialists and healthcare institutions that will be involved in the pilot study. This step is already implemented. The second step is to conduct the research, which involves focus group discussions and online questionnaire. That should allow us to identify missing competencies and their content, tasks which could be delegated, as well as the most effective ways of delegating tasks. And final step involves preparation of improvement material, that is proposals for institutions which are implementing policy. That is the Ministry of Health, which I'm representing, and the Ministry of Education, Science and Sport. In order to identify the tasks that could be transferred, we initiated discussions with the 2 largest primary care providers in Lithuania. That is primary care institution Centro Poliklinika and primary care institution called Kauno Miesto Poliklinika. These 2 large primary care centers are based in Vilnius and Kaunas districts and cover over 200,000 persons in the database. Healthcare professionals working in the selected institutions have the most intense schedule, and these were the factors were considered these factors as the most important when choosing these primary care institutions as our main stakeholders in the pilot. In the pilot, we involved over 100 healthcare professionals, which were delegated from aforementioned primary care institutions. And as I mentioned earlier, one of our pilot project goals is to find out through discussions with specialists what tasks could be shifted So the next step in our pilot was conducting focus group interviews with primary healthcare workers. And as illustrated in the slide, we conducted 2 focus group meetings with a goal to understand the point of view of the health workers and their attitudes toward task shifting, its feasibility and potentiality. Focus group participants included both general physicians and nurses in separate groups. Table 1 presents findings from the focus group interviews in the form of a summary. And as you can see from this table, focus group participants identified the activities potentially to be shifted, such as prescribing healthcare supplies and medications, management of healthcare prevention programs, or patient consultation. Specialists also discussed the barriers for task shifting. Generally, participants reported legal constraints, lack of competences, and training as the main barriers for task shifting. The focus group participants indicated that development of nursing education programs and legislative changes would stimulate the redistribution of tasks among health workers. It should be also noted that focus group results were used to create questionnaire survey items, which I will discuss in the next slide. So based on the findings of focus group discussions, we created questionnaire survey, which aims to explore knowledges, perception, and attitudes of general practice nurses and psychiatric mental health nurses toward task shifting experiences and practices in primary care. Totally, we are planning to approach 100 respondents to complete a survey. And as set out in the figure 1, questionnaire consists of 6 thematic parts and 38 survey questions. Questionnaire involves questions about general knowledge of task shifting, areas and specific tasks that could be shifted to nurses, measures to be taken for task shifting, and potential outcomes of task shifting process. I will conclude my presentation by pointing out the next steps of our pilot, which includes identification of missing competencies and their content, creating task list report, which will identify the tasks which could be shifted, also preparing a guideline on the most effective ways of task shifting from family doctors, psychiatrists to nurses and nursing assistants, and finally to prepare an improvement material or the proposals for institutions which are implementing healthcare workers related policy. Thank you very much for your attention.
And thanks to you, Solveiga, for this very interesting presentation. I'm sure that in the Q&A session, there will be questions for you to have more details about what you are analyzing in Lithuania. But now we can move to the south of Europe from Lithuania to the Lombardy region, and to listen to the experience and so how in Lombardy they are facing the shifting issue, opportunity and challenges. We have Alessandro Colombo from Polis Lombardia. So please, Alessandro, over to you.
Thank you very much, Paolo. Welcome to everybody, and thank you for the opportunity of presenting this part of the pilot project. Of course, I'm going to try and show my slides. Hold on a second. Can you see them? No. Paolo, can you see
Yes,
the slide?
but not in the presentation mode. So if you can
Okay, I'm going to do the presentation mode, and then it should work now. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
So we are in. I'm sorry, I can't do it. I have to go through the normal presentation, otherwise I can't do it. I'm sorry, but I have to do this way, otherwise it's not going to work. We work at the Academy for Healthcare Training. It's in Lombardy, 10 million people in the north of Italy. We try to exploit the possibilities that we got in terms of perimetrating the area, which is primary care. Of course, primary care in substantial evolution, both in Italy and Europe. And we try to use the significant asset of people that we've been training in our activities, mainly family nurses and GPs in training. We are talking about these numbers, so we focused on the possibility to send a questionnaire and a survey to this population, particularly family nurses in the courses and GPs training courses. The contents that we dealt with are very close to our colleagues in Lithuania. So apart from the personal data, their experience, the awareness and the willingness to take part with task shifting. And then we also tried at the beginning with just in preliminary way to see what they were really willing to do in terms of the areas and tasks that can be shifted. I'm going to give you a brief flavor of the response rate, what's going on in terms of awareness and interest, and some preliminary, very preliminary results, just to give you the input of what happened. That in terms of the response rate, it's quite interesting to notice that it in itself maybe it's a result. As you can see, the percentage of family nurses who reply is significantly higher than the percentage of the GPs. That could also be a matter of reflection. In terms of the awareness and interest, we are very similar in terms of, have you heard about task shifting? So the knowledge of task shifting is still relatively low. In terms, on the other side, of the willingness to take part directly, a direct involvement in task shifting, you can notice a slightly higher percentage of family nurses compared to GPs. And again, it has to do with what Professor Gilles Dussol discussed at the beginning. There are constraints and probably also categories and professionals have different perceptions. If you look at the question, for example, as family nurses, are you required to perform tasks that belong to the GPs? You can see in the two waves. The two graphs represent simply the two waves. Okay, so in theory it has to be merged. Again, it's not statistically significant so far, but just to give you the flavor. So roughly half of it's a yes and no. Okay, family nurses they do say yes, we're going to do stuff that belongs to the GPs. But if you look at the GPs and you ask the same question on the other one, are you required to perform tasks or functions that could be also performed by family nurses? You can see that it's significantly higher. So the perception of the GPs seems to be that they are not overloaded, but they're doing stuff which does not belong to them. Another interesting reply: as family nurses, do you believe you can adequately perform certain tasks that belong to the GPs? And you can see that the yes is again significant. And on the other side, to the GPs, do you believe you can adequately perform certain tasks that belongs to nurses area? It's again significantly, it's a no in this case. So you can see a kind of resistance, a significant resistance. But even more in the following question, if you say, in your opinion, because now we ask two, how can I say, two specific questions, just to test the field. Now we ask, in your opinion, as a family nurses, in the context of basic we're talking about diagnostic dimension. You can see how high is the percentage of the family nurses who think that they can do diagnostic. But if you look at the other slides, impressively on the other side, look at the GPs. That's really the other way around. For the GPs, there's no way. If we took another topic, which is the prescription, which also Gilles mentioned at the beginning, in terms of the prescription, the answers are different. You can see, as for the family nurses, it's highly possible to prescribe, but also, again, in the prescription, it's even stronger, the resistance of the GPs. So it's not still any kind of positive result that I can observe you, but it's just the flavor of the beginning of the first survey, what they show. So next step are the data cleaning. We have to do adjustment and lots of work on the data. So again, don't take my numbers as fixed. New ways, definitely, with new courses, and more questions. Let me say there are also questions, and as for the question, I think we have to work closely to our friends, Paolo in Lithuania, and at this point merging the two results and orientation. Verify the targets probably could be enlarged compared to what we thought at the beginning, and then analyzing the result. And then the main thing is to what extent we can experiment in task shifting discipline in training courses. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Alessandro, for this very interesting presentation and the results of the survey that are sure very interesting. So the opinion of the two sides of the moon. So in this case, family nurses and GPs. Okay, so now it's time to open the discussion. So I strongly encourage everyone to use the Q&A box or eventually also the chat box to post your question to the speakers. In the meanwhile, if I can ask Alessandro a question regarding the role of the family nurses. So the family nurse, it's a new role in Italy. It's not an health profession in its own. Okay, it's not a nursing specialization. Okay, so it's just a new role that has to be, it's a sort of container up to now, no? That has to be filled in with tasks, with competency and so on. Do you think that task shifting can be also in this case an opportunity? So also I'm looking also at your survey and the pilot study that you are running as an opportunity to fill in this container, and so to define what can be the responsibility, and so also the competencies for this new role for nurses.
Thank you for the question, Paolo. I think that the more I work on this first, again, initial survey, the more I think that our pilot project together with our colleagues might be useful in order to answer this question. In other way, as you mentioned, a new kind of job, you know, has got lots of hopes and lots of constraints and resistances. As you mentioned, family nurses are not a proper, a specific professional category of work. So I can't give you an answer, but as Gilles at the beginning said, it's not just an opportunity, it's necessary. Because somebody has to take care of these people, of our people in their home or in some places. And what I'm sure about, and this is an impression, Paolo, it's not a brilliant, but from my point of view, looking at Lombardy, but I think it could be shared to other regions, but the problem is not adding other hospitals or other structure, it's also having care of places where people are. And practically, who's going to go to their homes? So the answer is, let's work together and try to better, because my impression, and I'm finishing also, Paolo, is that in terms of policymakers, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there's a very clear idea of what they mean by family nurses. It has more to do with roles and less to do with functions and needs. So our job, our working together might also help in defining new needs. So I'm sorry, I'm not giving you an answer, but as Jill said, it's necessary. It's not an opportunity. Somebody has to meet our needs at home.
Thank you, Alessandro.
Paolo, can I say something?
Sure.
I have two suggestions. One is based on the observation in most countries that task sharing occurs in an informal manner. In other words, it's not recognized. So it would be interesting that in the pilot studies, you could identify 1, 2, 3 cases where this happens. If you look at a family medicine team, for instance, and document how this is taking place. Just to show that even though there's no formal recognition, the reality of task shifting exists. The other suggestion is to go beyond looking at individual perceptions, because there is a gap between what individuals will say and what their representative organizations will say, professional council, trade union. And it would be interesting to interview policymakers in Lombardy, that would be at the level of the region, but also at the level of the ministry in Rome, to get a sort of more comprehensive picture of the political environment. So maybe that's not in the plans you have defined at the beginning, but if you could spare some energy to do that, I think you would learn a lot about potential barriers and potential facilitators. These are only suggestions.
Very welcome and appreciated suggestion, Gilles. So thanks a lot. And well, talking about Italy at least, and then maybe I would like also to ask Solveig in Lithuania, but I'm Italian, so I know better the Italian situation. I think that yes, it's feasible. At least Alessandro, correct me if I'm wrong. The plan for Lombardy is also to interview the stakeholder, the regional stakeholder in Lombardy. And but we can also try to identify some key stakeholders at the national level, at ministerial level, and listen to their opinion to have this more comprehensive picture, as you said, Gilles. For sure, yeah, it will be very useful, because well, we know that all the regulative and the legislative framework is very important. So Vega mentioned that is one of the issue mentioned in the survey in Lithuania, that legislative changes can be also an incentive to introduce the shifting. On the other hand, we are aware that the legislative framework is also a barrier. Okay, so it's both sides. And so Vega, what about Lithuania? It will be possible also to have this more comprehensive picture about the stakeholder opinion and policymakers' opinion.
Talking about task shifting, actually in Lithuania there is happening in reality, informally, task shifting between family doctors and nurses. They already sharing their tasks. So, for example, during the discussions, focus group discussions, the nurses, they expressed that they already implemented these tasks, such as patient consultation, follow-up, that they usually tasks that they are performing. But there is a need to expand these tasks by giving more to nurses, and by expanding their roles, they express the need of that. In order to do that, we need to change some legislative documents. For example, medical norm that regulates the nurses' competencies. So answering to the Gilles question about the reality and what's happening. So yeah, that we need to, at this moment, we need to take some steps toward legislative changes. Could you remind me, Paula, another question which you wanted to ask me, because I didn't get the second part of your question. Could you repeat it? Oh, yes.
Sorry, I was muted. The possibility to involve in the pilot also the policymakers, so not only the health professional that you are involving up to now, but also policymaker at ministerial level, and I can add also other type of stakeholders, trade unions, for example. No, in the chat box, the one participant from Portugal said that the government in Portugal is has a sort of a plan, some intention to introduce the shifting, but on the other hand, the trade unions seems to be against of. So it's. I think that following the suggestion by Gilles, it's very important to increase the number and the type of stakeholders that we are involving in our pilot project. And so the question was if it's feasible for you in the time frame also the project to involve this type of national stakeholders.
Thank you, Paula. So yes, I think it's feasible, but we don't have such an opposition, maybe as in Portugal, from trade unions or from nurses about task shifting. They express a big agreement that the task shifting is very needed, and we don't have any opposition during focus group discussions about that. So talking about the trade union and they as a possible stakeholders, I don't know if it's very necessary, but of course there's possibility to think about that. And talking about other types of stakeholders, actually we had few discussions with the Ministry of Education and Science and Sports about the possibility to change nursing education programs and to involve more elements to nurses program, for example, related to with the long-term care project, which also happening in Lithuania right now. So I think, yes, Ministry of Education could be another stakeholder which we could consult with it. So, but at the moment, we still need to complete our survey because we don't have results yet. So when we have a full picture, then we could decide what are the next steps and possibilities and other possible stakeholders to be involved in study. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you a lot. Thanks a lot. So are there any other questions from the participants, from the audience?
I have a question for Gilles. May I? Sorry, I don't know. Maybe it's an internal discussion, but I would be. I think the first point that Gilles pointed out is quite intriguing. No, when you just underline that more than often task shifting occurs in informal ways and not informal. And to some extent, Gilles, this is healthcare system in itself. So healthcare system is more historically and practically every day occurs in real life, and then it becomes a kind of formalized system. My question is, in your experience, to what extent, in terms of policy making and European project, we can go in that direction and bringing what is informal to a formal level? Because to some extent, it's still something secret, something which is not allowed to be accepted. Everybody knows that it happens, but it's secretly. So if you got any suggestion, how can we make it a clear pathway from informal to formal?
That's a tough one. I would say that the first step is to document such situations which are likely to happen where people work in team. When people work in team, with time, they build trust, and then they allow for some sharing of tasks. This is not recognized, this is not legal. One of the issues which will be raised in any country by all professionals is, what is my legal responsibility? So you have to be careful about discussing this aspect. What I would say, if you document cases, if you disseminate this information, you are showing that it is possible. You are showing that some professionals are open to that. You are showing that the impact on patients is positive. And then you have to convince some champions, as the Americans say, to promote the idea of task sharing. So that's why I'm saying that you have to go to professional organizations, education institutions, even at the level of political actors, to have a sort of small critical mass of people who believe that it is needed and it is possible. Usually you will find some people in each of these levels. You don't need to convince everyone. You need to convince a small critical mass, and then the ball is rolling. but it's a process. Look at what happens in the European Union. You mentioned Italy. I mentioned Portugal. At the other end of the spectrum, you have countries where nurses, to take the example of nurses, and there are examples with pharmacists, nurses are very autonomous. In Scandinavia, for instance, they have their own patients, they can prescribe, they cannot prescribe anything, but they are trained to prescribe to some extent medicines, exams, analysis. So the process is basically a political process. You can show that it is technically possible, feasible, it does exist, but then you have to convince those who influence the ultimate decision that they should promote such sharing of tasks. And as someone said, the objective is not to cut costs, because usually it doesn't have an impact on costs. The objective is to use the capacities you have and to provide better quality services. So that's not a roadmap for you, Alessandro, but it's a general approach to moving from the informal to the formally recognized.
Yeah, because according to these suggestions, Paolo, I think we might slightly change our pathway. And what I might do now, together with our friends, mirroring our friends in Lithuania, maybe to arrange a kind of focus group and interview with policymakers and representatives, and then going back to the data, maybe. That might be a possible contribution.
Just to give the example of Italy, Paolo knows very well. In the Ministry of Health, you have a few people who are already convinced, a few people who accompanied the work of the joint action on health workforce planning and forecasting. So they are aware of those issues and they share your views that this is important and necessary. So if you can get some people at your level in the region, some people at the level of professional councils, you just need one or two, but people who have a voice, people who are perceived as credible by their colleagues, then you build a sort of alliance which can help promote this idea that the workforce should be managed in a much more flexible way than it is at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
And I would ask that in Lithuania, you have this type of people at the university. 10 years ago, we published a policy brief with an ex-minister of health in Lithuania, Silvinas Padega, someone who is credible, someone whose voice is heard. So everywhere you have people you can rely on. The point is how to mobilize these people.
Thank you, Gilles. So at the moment, Lithuania, as I mentioned, there's no such an urgent need to mobilize stakeholders to convince them for task shifting and its necessity. At the moment, we just have to take steps toward task shifting. That is legislative changes that is strengthening the teamwork initiatives in primary care institutions. And at the moment in Lithuania, there is a lot of changes that I directed to the nursing and strengthening the nursing services. For example, home care nursing services are expanded. For example, long-term care services are also planning to expand. And accordingly, the role of the nurses in this process are to be strengthened. So we need to not to convince, but just take up concrete steps toward task shifting implementation at the moment. So.
Thanks a lot, Suvega, also for your input, and Alessandro and Gilles also for your further recommendation. I do not see any other question, just a remark from Portugal that remind us that, of course, not only nurses, but also all the other allied professions. So we are talking of, okay. Okay, now it's time, I think, to close this webinar. Just some very few closing remarks from what we have learned today, and I think that we have learned a lot. Well, first of all, that task shifting already exists. Okay, it's already there. Maybe it's an informal way to perform healthcare services, and so the next step is to formalize and also to regulate this shifting. So we need this legislative reform, legislative changes, as Suvega just pointed out. The way to is on one hand to involve, of course, stakeholders, key stakeholders, regional, at the national level, ministerial level. How to do it? Well, basically, the way that Gilles suggests is to let these people know that, to describe that task shifting is already there. So to describe practical cases. I think that the next task that we have in task shifting is the sort of storytelling task. So maybe we can create some task shifting vignette, no, describing a situation in which task shifting already is happening, also maybe in a formal way in which the added value is very clear, and then to tell, so as a storyteller, to tell the stakeholders that it works, that it's feasible, and it's necessary to face the current challenges. So these are, in my opinion, the key remarks for this webinar. And I would like just to thanks all of you to participate to this webinar. Thanks a lot to the speakers and to all the participants.